Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have the founder of Leaving MAGA, Rich Logis, with us today. We'll chat with Rich in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Rich Logis is a former MAGA activist, volunteer, and pundit. He founded his nonprofit, Leaving MAGA, in 2024 as a new community for those who leave the MAGA movement, who have doubts about their support for Donald Trump, and for friends and family of those in MAGA. On his Leaving MAGA website, Rich has shared his compelling story of his odyssey and what led him to leave MAGA in August of 2022. He has most recently contributed to the Midas Touch Network. Rich, welcome into the back room.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
I like your hat. Tell our audience what it is.
Thank you. Yeah, let me pull it down here. So it says Leaving MAGA. I know some say to me, why don't you have a white hat or a blue hat? And I say, no. We need to reclaim red hats. Nobody should own the red hat brand. So we're gonna look to take it back with our Leaving MAGA hats.
It's so funny. I went for a walk the other day with a friend of mine, and he's walking up to me, and I see him wearing a red hat, just like yours. And I was like, wait a second, has he jumped the fence? And it was a Colgate hat, you know, his alma mater. And I was like, dude, that's don't they come in any other color? But you're right, you know, it is a bold move to wear. I mean, think about that. It's a bold move to wear a red baseball cap today. But look, that's where we've come to.
Well, I'm going to make sure that anyone who wants to get our hats, you know, we're going to keep them. We're going to keep them the red because I don't think the president should own the red hat brand.
Yeah, nor should he own the American flag. So I want to get to your story in just a moment, but I want to start by peeling the onion back a little bit. So tell me about your pre-MAGA life. Who were you back then? Tell me a little bit about your life, your politics.
You know, before 2015, I was someone who spent many years believing that I was cynical, I was pessimistic. I believed the two parties were the same. I voted for third parties many times. I was a Ralph Nader voter several times. And I felt very politically lonely before 2015 and 16. And what MAGA provided to me, as it does to so many others right now, is a sense of belonging and a political community. I was not a member of any political community at all before 2015 and 16. Having felt very politically homeless, I remember thinking in 2015 before Trump ran, if we recall, it was Andy going to be Jeb Bush versus Hillary Clinton. And even apolitical friends of mine said to me at the time, they said, you know, they asked me, Rich, didn't we fight a monarchy and sever from a monarchy to gain our independence, and now we're going to have political dynasties? So I had, this was politically indifferent friends of mine saying this. So I had resigned myself to just voting again for third parties until Trump decided that he wanted to get into this. And even though I didn't immediately support him, he did have an outsider appeal without any government experience or military or anything that was of Washington, D.C., like a Hillary or like a Jeb Bush and the Bush family. So for me, once I decided that I was all in for Trump, I decided to volunteer for his campaign. I was a grassroots activist. I made phone calls. I did phone banking. I showed people where to get registered. I recruited people to voting for Trump. I even wrote part of the call script for the Trump campaign. And so for me, it wasn't just being a partisan Trump voter. It was my new community, and there were many around me whom I respected who were also Trump voters. And I was influenced. I allowed myself to be influenced into thinking that Hillary and the Democrats pose these existential threats to us. And when I look back on it, I know how wrong I was, but it's what I believed at the time. And I attribute that really to that cynicism, pessimism, and that political ignorance that I felt before Trump ran.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned a conspiracy, basically. It seems that conspiracies is what fuels MAGA. Obama's birth certificate, the fake news, the 2020 election, Russia, 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 the Biden crime family, the rigged judicial system, the Epstein files, which I want to ask you about in a little while. How important to MAGA is the us versus them narrative, the need to always share these common enemies with Trump?
So much of MAGA is about that. I will tell you, Andy, that when I was in MAGA, if somebody was not 100% with us, they were 100% against us. So if someone was 99.99% with us, they were 100% against us. And it didn't matter whether they were Democrats or liberals or progressives or anti-Trump Republicans or conservatives. If you were not with MAGA, you were considered an enemy of the movement. And it is true that mythologies and lies and conspiracies do buttress so much of the thought process and the groupthink throughout MAGA. I will tell you that, for example, any information that remotely refuted any of the pervasively held beliefs throughout the MAGA community was always shunned. It was always kept out. I even had a phrase that I had trademarked at the time, which I called the Democrat media industrial complex. That's how much I thought that the press was simply a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. And I also looked at anti-Trump Republicans and conservatives in some light as actually even more traitorous than Democrats. And that's the kind of language, Andy, that I actually used back then. And so it's crucial to MAGA that the shared enemies be identified. But I will say this, even though I didn't think of it this way at the time, and I don't think it's thought about this way right now, the shared enemy of MAGA is really liberalism and liberal democracy. And I think part of that does stem from the fact that there are many Americans who have been traumatized in lots of different ways, politically, economically, and they feel that liberal democracy has failed them. And to some extent, for many, that is a valid fear and conclusion that they've come to. So if you feel that liberal democracy has let you down, you're going to seek out the alternative. And unfortunately, the alternative over the last decade has been MAGA. Mm-hmm. And as part of this feeling of liberalism failing us, it's created a hive mind within MAGA that anyone who is not with MAGA, there is some kind of conspiracy against Trump voters that comes from liberals. And I'm not here to apologize for maybe parts of liberalism that don't always work, because no ism is perfect, but it is important, the us versus them, because it's always important to identify who that shared enemy is.
So when you spoke earlier about what basically initially drew you to the MAGA movement, it really centered on political reasoning. But I'm curious to know, because I've always thought it can't just be about politics. I mean, I was all in for Hillary. I was all in for Harris, but I wasn't wearing clothing. I wasn't waiting online in the rain for 4 hours to go to rallies. Like, there's something else that clearly has been happening over the years with people in the MAGA movement. So do you think there was something on an emotional or more deeply personal level that there was a need that being in MAGA fulfilled at that time?
I think it was almost wholly emotional. And yes, there were some valid points that had been raised by the Trump campaign about, for example, about economics, jobs going overseas, once vibrant communities that had been hollowed out. Again, people feeling left behind by liberalism and capitalism and liberal democracy. But I didn't support Trump for really ideological reasons. My belief was that the entire established political order needed to be obliterated, that the two parties were the same, that they failed to represent most Americans, and that they really only worked to represent the wealthy and the powerful. Even though Trump was wealthy and even though he had power, he gave voice to, I think, the feelings that so many had about feeling left behind and unseen and unheard. So it wasn't really ideological for me. It was feeling like I was finally on a team led by someone I could root for and I could get behind, as opposed to just being this politically lonely, disaffected, disillusioned American who was just going to vote again for a third party candidate who couldn't win.
So let me follow up with you on what you just said. Donald Trump is a billionaire. He lives in a mansion in the sky in New York City. He lives in a mansion in Florida. He has his own private jumbo jet. He travels in limousines. I've always been fascinated by the contention that he is one of us, according to the MAGA folks. To me, there's such a disconnect there. How do people in the MAGA movement get over the obvious that the guy who claims to be taking down or vote for me and I'll fight the elitist is perhaps one of the biggest elitists himself in this country? How do you square that?
Those points you made and about the wealth and the money and the material goods, those are considered a positive because part of the Trump mythology is being this successful business person. And the outsider status when he first ran did him an immense amount of favors, because if you recall the way that he positioned his campaign, it was, I know how these elites feel about you because I'm around them all the time and they look down on you and they condescend upon you. And people who felt that way politically saw in Trump a messenger. And the devotion to Trump really stems from the fact that he is the leader of this community and is viewed as someone who is always fighting for those MAGA Americans on their behalf. There's this meme that is I think it's probably a pretty well-known one. It's Trump sitting down. He's got his hand in the formation of a firearm, and the text reads, "It's not me they're after you. I'm just in the way." And people in MAGA feel that way about Trump. Now, some good news about this, Andy, is, and I know we'll get to this in a little bit as well, but I do think that some of the cracks are starting to show.
Well, hold that thought, because
Sure.
we are going to get to that, and that is a very important discussion to have. But so you mentioned the business success, and I want to keep challenging because I feel like I'm asking questions for like tens of millions of people who have the same question, because we've been watching this phenomenon for the last 10 years. All the bankruptcies, all the business failures. How does MAGA square that with the branding of the brilliant businessman?
When someone is so invested in this political community and it becomes their identity and their personhood and their being, and their life is subsumed into MAGA and it becomes obsessive and it shapes entirely their worldview, we have ways of justifying the illogical.
But what you're saying sounds cultish.
So on the cult point, I'm glad you brought that up because I always like to have this part of the conversation. I understand why someone who has never been in MAGA would think that MAGA is a cult. And I will say that there were some cult-like aspects to being in MAGA. The reason that I caution against the cult language is because we don't want to push people further into MAGA by referring to them as cultists, especially the ones who might have doubts. We want to extract people out of MAGA. And when I was in MAGA, we used to say, well, we're not the cult, the outside world is the cult, and we're not the crazies, the outside world is the crazies. So what happens is you have everyone calling each other cultists and crazies, and there's a circuitous loop where everybody gets stuck in it. And as hard as it is to leave MAGA, and I'll get into that, I'm sure, in our conversation, it is possible to leave. It is harder to leave an actual cult than it is to leave MAGA, albeit it is difficult to leave MAGA. And for me, I could tell you some of the cult-like aspects. My MAGA second family oftentimes took precedence over my own blood family. And I neglected at times my familial duties as a parent and as a husband. And that second family, Andy, we had that we had the sense of gathering, and we had the camaraderie, attending each other's holiday parties and events for the kids and birthday parties. There was not a day that went by that I did not talk to some of my fellow MAGA Americans. And forget about taking a day off. I never took an hour off. After Trump's victory, I didn't say, okay, great job, everyone. See you in 4 years. I got deeper and deeper,
Mhm.
became a podcaster, was doing syndicated radio guest spots from time to time. I had bylines in places like Fox and the Federalist. You mentioned the Obama birther conspiracy. I wrote for the website who originated that, WorldNet Daily. And I wrote dozens and dozens and dozens of freelance pieces without ever being paid for it. I spent not a small amount of my own money to be a MAGA pundit because I wanted to be an influencer and get the attention of the president. That's what I was after. So for me, it was my life. It was all consuming for me.
Mm.
But ultimately, I was able to leave, and it's why I would just caution everyone from looking at from framing MAGA as a cult, because we want to give people an exit ramp to leave. We don't want to give them a reason to dig their heels in.
Trump has always claimed that everything against him is fake, rigged, and or a witch hunt. All the accusations, the news reporting, the 2020 election, the impeachments, the indictments, the conviction, that it's all just one big giant conspiracy of Democrats, Republicans, independents, former aides, the media, prosecutors, judges, election officials, the list goes on and on and on. And that he is just an awesome, innocent guy that everyone in the world is gunning for, to bring him down for no good reason. It's a preposterous supposition. So, did you ever question the logic in that? That can this really all be true? That he is just this great innocent guy, and they're all just out to get him?
I didn't personally see Donald Trump as an infallible person, but I did believe at the time sincerely, albeit incorrectly, that Democrats were. I called Democrats and wrote about them as malignant. This
Mm.
was the kind of language, this dehumanizing, vilifying language that I used. And so whenever there was something against Trump, we always viewed it as, if it's an attack on Trump, it's an attack on us. If it's a Mitt Romney attack, if it's an attack by the press, then it's really an attack on us. And so when I was in MAGA, we looked at anything against Trump as a means by which to try to silence and suppress his supporters. That's why we took it personal whenever there was any action against Trump. So it's true I didn't see him as an infallible person, but I also did believe that there was an orchestrated attempt amongst Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans to try to take down Donald Trump, and as a result try to silence us as Trump voters. And that's why we always banded together. Again, here comes the community part of this again. We always banded together whenever there was some action against Trump, and it's, we did believe that it was actually deliberate and against him and against all of we as supporters.
I guess in retrospect, I doubt you thought of this then, but in retrospect, what MAGA essentially does is give him license to do anything, because when legitimate authorities come after him to hold him accountable, what he does is turn around and say, hey, it's all fake. And, they're really not coming for me. They're coming for you, like you said. And so it's just this cycle that is perpetuated by the undying loyalty that he has from this movement. And I guess it's impossible to see that, perhaps, for the reasons you're stating, when you're in the thick of it.
I think that this point about people feeling that government and politics have let them down, when Trump, who is persuasive, has persuaded many into believing that they're coming for him, but they're really after them. If somebody has a feeling already that they were neglected in our politics, that they were left behind, it's easy for them to latch on to that. And that's one of the, to me, it's not only one of the most preposterous, but it's one of the most traumatic lies of Trump that there is some kind of conspiracy
Hmm.
against Republicans and Trump voters. That because there's not. But if someone feels like liberal democracy and the two parties have let them down, and here's Donald Trump who hasn't done anything wrong in their view, and there's all there's impeachment, there are legal actions. Well, someone's going to conclude that yeah, they might be going at him, but they're really after me. And if someone already has that feeling of being forgotten and is downtrodden and is disenchanted, it's very easy for that person to feel like, yeah, it is fake,
Hmm.
and that it isn't real, and that they're only attacking him because of all the supporters he has.
Yeah. So what was the turning point for you? When did you wake up and go, holy shit, it's time to get out?
Well, to paraphrase the late venerable Ernest Hemingway, my epiphany happened gradually and then suddenly all at once. And there were a handful of cracks that started with Trump mismanaging the pandemic. I knew that he was botching the response. I didn't support January 6th. Now, having said that, I also thought it was hyperbolized into a bigger deal than it really was. And I also didn't believe, I thought it was just made into a bigger deal and exaggerated by the press and Democrats and anti Trump Republicans. But I didn't support what happened that day. And I also didn't believe that Joe Biden won the election by fraud.
Hmm.
I remember telling fellow Floridians, Trump, Trump MAGA voters here, that even though I thought we were going to win re-election, I knew that there was a chance that we could lose because there was going to be a massive turnout. And there was. There was a massive turnout. So I didn't believe that. But I also didn't jump ship after the pandemic and January 6th and the stolen election lies. The first accelerant for me was actually not Donald Trump. It was my governor, Ron DeSantis. In the summer of 2021, he started platforming anti vaxxers at his press conference. And that was at a time, Andy, if people recall, the Delta surge
Hmm.
was occurring with COVID and kids were befalling ill. And there were cases, reports in Florida and around the country of children dying from COVID. And I thought that Ron DeSantis, all factors considered, had tried to do a reasonably good job as governor to manage the pandemic. Compared to Trump, he was a Nobel laureate. So when he did that, it really shocked and confused me because I am not an anti vaccine person. So I did not understand why Ron DeSantis did that. So after that occurred, I did something that sounds so very simple, but was profoundly life changing and altering for me, which is I diversified my news and information sources. And
Hmm.
after I did that, I started to slowly scrutinize a lot of the genuinely held beliefs that I had had about Trump and MAGA and Democrats. But for me, the final straw was actually May 24th, 2022, which was the Uvalde, Texas school shooting.
Hmm.
And even though Donald Trump wasn't president, I already knew what his response was going to be. I already knew what the GOP response was going to be. And it was shortly thereafter that I quietly left MAGA. But there was something that was really gnawing at me because I was always so unapologetically public in my support for Trump. I felt that I needed to reciprocate that. And it was on August 30th, 2022, I wrote and published a mea culpa. And I said in this story that I was wrong, that I made a mistake, and that I wanted to apologize to anyone I may have hurt with my words, deeds, and rhetoric. And that, uh, and the God's honest truth, Andy, is I actually never thought that anybody would care. But I can pinpoint the exact day that I finally said enough. And it was on August 30th, 2022. I call it my Leaving MAGAversary. And there were two reasons that it was really so hard to leave. First was that second family. I knew that if I left, I was going to walk away from people I had developed close relationships with over the last half decade. And I knew that leaving would probably mean I would not have that community anymore. And then the other part was the realization that so much of what I believed was wrong. And it wasn't just one or two beliefs, it was years of accumulated falsehoods that I liberatingly but painfully came to realize we're wrong, that I was mistaken, and that I had allowed myself to believe lie after lie.
And was it a moment where like I guess I don't know how that this occurs because I haven't experienced it, but is it like revelations that just sort of start hitting you like a windfall, like, oh, oh my God, oh, that's it. Like, was it something like that?
It
Like
what happens?
like a wave of realization of things
Yes,
starting to make sense all of a sudden to you?
yes, and specifically, what happens is, in my case, I spent a lot of nights in solitude, just my thoughts and I, and and spending time just vacillating between being in MAGA, leaving it. Do I stay? Do I go? I would listen to Trump talk about January 6th again, or his stolen election lies, traumatizing his voters, knowing that he was lying to them. And I would say, I don't know if I can support this. But then I would look at a photograph of an event at Mar-a-Lago that I went to, and I would say, no, 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 this is the right place. What happens in that process, because it took me an entire year to make that, to finally make the decision to leave, you find yourself making fewer and fewer excuses for the indefensible.
Mm.
You know, you find yourself saying, I I am really struggling to justify January 6th, for example, as what the GOP called it, which was legitimate political discourse, finding it harder to defend the indefensible, whether it was J6 or it was Trump's lies or it was post COVID pandemic fallout. It just got to a point where Ron DeSantis continuing with his anti vax propaganda and Fauciism and everything that he engaged in. It just got to a point where, and after Uvalde, I said that I could not do this anymore, that I could no longer associate myself with this movement because this movement was something that I didn't think that it was. I believe that it was for the good of the country.
Hmm.
I remember I was 39 years old in 2016. So for me, Make America Great Again was not nostalgic. I saw it as very future facing, progressive. I even remember saying in my podcasts that I saw the 2016 victory as a second kind of founding of America, which now to hear myself say that is delusional, but it's what I thought at the time. And so for me, I had to let go of something that had shaped my entire identity. But the moment that I published that apology, I knew it was the right decision. On one hand, it was exhilarating to do it. On the other hand, I remember right before publishing it, there was still this gravitational pull back to MAGA because it was all I had known for more than half a decade. And it was, in the prospect of leaving was frightening to me. But I did it. And the moment that I published that story, I knew it was the correct decision. I never thought anyone would care. And after I published it, almost instantaneously, I had people writing me comments. Rich, can you talk to my mom, my dad,
Mm.
my brother, my sister, my kids, my best friend? You know, can you help me talk to them? They're in MAGA. I don't know what to do. I was completely naive and oblivious to how many relationships had been torn asunder by this movement, and I had to grapple with the fact that I had a hand in that.
Mm. I want to ask you about the elephant in the room right now, which is the Epstein situation,
Mhm.
because it speaks to so much of what you're talking about. It is the mother of all conspiracies, but that's what I want you to help me understand. What is it about this particular conspiracy, of all the conspiracies that are out there, of all the lies, of all the spins, of all the gaslighting, broken promises, of all the things Trump, we both now realize Trump has perpetrated on his loyal supporters? What is it about this particular conspiracy that is so profoundly important to MAGA, and why it is driving such a wedge through the base?
I think there is a multi-pronged answer. And the first part of the answer is that I believe most people in MAGA, just like most Americans, care about the safety and security and well-being of children. And we know who Jeffrey Epstein was. We know that he had associates who aided and abetted him. And I think that for many in MAGA, they would like to know who else, along with Epstein, may have harmed and injured and traumatized children. That's my interest in the story. I don't care what names are being. That doesn't matter what party they are. It doesn't matter what their affiliations are. That's what I want to know, and I do feel that there's a large segment of MAGA who feels that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part of the answer is, for years, you had people on the right wing talking about Epstein and Democrats and liberals in Hollywood being part of this child sex trafficking cabal.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and for months upon months upon months, dating back for years, you had Donald Trump, you had J.D. Vance, you had Donald Trump Jr., you had MAGA influencers all talk about release the list, release the file. Now they're saying there isn't any. So they were either lying then or they're lying right now. And so the conspiracy about who's in the list, all of a sudden, Donald Trump made this promise that we're going to have this big reveal, and now it's a big dud and it's nothing. So that conspiracy has definitely fueled MAGA to some extent. And logically, if all of these people were allegedly in these files, Democrats and Bill Clinton and liberals and all these people, one would think that Donald Trump would be not only releasing it, but would be gold plating it and selling it with different names on it. And yet that's not happening. So MAGA to some extent is feeling betrayed. And I think there is a burgeoning cognitive dissonance pervasive across MAGA. I think it's causing a lot of confusion. It's causing doubts. It's causing some people to start to question even a little bit some of their allegiance to Trump. And right now, that's an opportunity for us at Leaving MAGA because we want to provide the exit ramp for them. We want them to have a new community to come to because if they leave MAGA, we don't want them to be on their own. We want them to come to a new place, and we serve to be that new community, that new destination for them.
So, worst case scenario for Trump, that MAGA doesn't get what it wants, whatever that may be. Let's call it the full release of the Epstein files and the black book client list that at least they were told for years existed. Is this the turning point? Are we at a critical point in the MAGA evolution where this could be the thing to bring down the house of cards? Or, like everything else, Teflon Don is going to escape this and we just move on to the next thing?
I want to answer it optimistically and say that I think this is going to be a line of demarcation for many in MAGA. Everyone moves at their own pace in their odyssey of leaving. For me, I had several lines, between I'd mentioned with J6 and Ron DeSantis and Uvalde, etc. I feel like this story, which is not going away, which is very rare in our media environment because stories come and go and this one is not going. I think this is going to be a red line for many. And I think that these cracks that we're talking about, I think the president knows that they're there. And this is the first time where he's had actual legitimate blowback from the base.
Yeah, and he's called them for the first time. This is the first time he's attacked them. Selfish, stupid, bad people. I don't need your support anymore. It's incredible that he's turned on his own base. And we ask, are they going to care? Or are they
MAGA, MAGA, like any toxic community and group, I do think eventually there will be some cannibalization of itself. And if this is the moment that it happens, then I don't want people to feel like, why did it take so long? Why did it take someone, this Jeffrey Epstein story for it to happen? If people are having doubts, let's nurture.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. And I think the key word you said before was many. There's this misconception that like MAGA has to die. Nope. In order for there to be a game changer in this country,
right,
5 to 15% peel away and say, I'm done like you have, and it's a different political landscape. So tell us about Leaving MAGA. How did you start it, and what is the mission of this organization?
Well, after I wrote my mea culpa, I spent the next year telling my story. I was asked by organizations and media to tell my story, and I was doing it because I felt it incumbent upon myself to show the country that the living proof that people can actually leave MAGA, and that I wasn't particularly special. I just made a decision to do it, and I as I was telling my story across the country, I had to make a decision that I want to just retire from whatever little public life I had, or did I want to take this further? And I decided to take it further, and I founded in early 2024 our organization. So we are a nonprofit. Leaving MAGA is a new community for people who decide to leave and tell their stories. We're also here for those who have doubts about their support for MAGA, and we're also here for friends and family of those who are still in the thrall of MAGA. So we are a new community. We're a support group and a safe space for people who self-empower, decide to leave, want to tell their stories publicly, become leaders and advocates for others to leave. And our mission is really designed to grow this community of people who reclaimed back their individuality from leaving MAGA. That's something that there's this mythology about rugged individualism in MAGA. The fact is, it's not true. It's essentially it's almost a wholly conformist community. So we're in the startup challenge phase, which is to get more and more known. That's why I appreciate you having us, because it will introduce to others what we're doing. We just need to keep getting more and more known, because the more known we are, the more testimonials we're going to have. I'm happy to report, we've actually got some 2024 Trump voters we are talking to right now who are having doubts. Not sure if they'll go public eventually. Maybe they will, but even if they don't, they're still welcome at our community. So we're online. We are expanding into in-person. We've got a handful of us who are doing more and more media, are becoming more public spokespeople and advocates for our work. And I'm really proud of the team we've put together. You know, we've got a small but very, very dedicated team. And to quote the book of Isaiah, as someone who's not a very religious Catholic, we're just trying to bring good news to the afflicted.
And you do offer some tools and resources on your website for those who need that. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We have a guide. It has actually two works. The first is an ebook, which I wrote. It's a little bit about myself, goes into a little bit more detail based on what we talked about today. It's called My MAGA Odyssey. And I've also got a guide at our site called Reaching Out. And the Reaching Out guide is designed for friends and family to utilize these tools to try to rejuvenate some of their relationships with close ones, to try to restore them to what they were before Trump and MAGA. I will say that our Reaching Out guide was utilized by one of our leaders, Stefania, and after many, many months of conversations with her brother, a 2024 MAGA supporter, just left MAGA. So the Reaching Out guide has been utilized in real life, real world situations with success. So people can download these. There's no cost to them. There's no strings attached. The only request we have is anyone who downloads it, we ask that they just subscribe to our newsletter. But our content is free. We don't charge for it. We are a nonprofit, so we do operate on donations if people, feel like they're inclined to give or they're able to. But people can get those works right at our site at leavingmaga.org. And they could also read all the testimonials that we have. We're up to almost 20 testimonials right now of people who have left.
Mm-hmm. My last question to you is, if you could say one thing to people still deep in MAGA who are starting to question things, what would that be?
We're here for you. We are here for you. We are a friendly ear. We know what you're going through. I know what you're going through, and there's a better way. Our life does not have to be consumed by MAGA and the toxicity and the trauma and the lies of it. We're living proof that it's possible to leave. Come to us. We do so without judgment, without ostracization. It's okay to say that we were wrong. It's okay to change our mind, and it's okay to say that we allowed ourselves to be lied to. What's more important than that is not continuing to believe the lie.
Mm-hmm. Rich, I appreciate you and support you and what you're doing. Thanks for your time, and I hope you'll come back and do this with me again soon.
It's my pleasure, Andy. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.